Rumpole and the Silver Teapot. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Old Bailey Stories. I am Horace Rumpole, an Old Bailey hack by trade and by temperament, and I should warn you at once that my idea of a quiet life is a glass of claret, a modest cigar, and a judge who has not already made up his mind. Unfortunately, the law is rarely so considerate, and marriage never is. She who must be obeyed has views on almost everything, on thrift, on exercise, on what one ought to do with one's evenings, on what one ought to do with one's career. I have views as well, though mine tend to be expressed in the privacy of my own skull, or, when driven to extremes, in the outer sanctum of Pomeroy's wine bar. Tonight's matter began, as so many disasters do, with domestic criticism and an innocent object, not a dagger, not a diamond necklace, a teapot, a large, silver, rather ugly teapot, which, like some silent witness in a dock, was discovered in a cupboard and treated by the police as though it had confessed to everything from burglary to treason. So, before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you like what I am doing here. Tell us where you are and what time it is in the comments. Now switch off the lights, pour a modest glass of Château Thames Embankment, and let us see what the Old Bailey has to say tonight. Chapter 1. The Cupboard Exhibit. It is one of the blessings of my life that Pomeroy's opens earlier than virtue and stays open later than conscience. On that particular morning I had escaped Froxbury Mansions with the speed of a man leaving the scene of a minor domestic offence. She who must be obeyed had begun at breakfast, as is her custom, with a brisk review of my shortcomings. "You are wearing that old gown again," she said. "You look as if you have slept in it." I had not slept in it. I had merely dozed in a chair while trying to read a volume of verse without being asked whether it matched the curtains. "It is a perfectly serviceable gown," I said. "It has seen justice done." "It has seen better days," Hilda replied. "So have you." Nick, our son, was mentioned next. Nick is always mentioned next. If there were a fire, Hilda would probably warn the flames that Nick was not settled. "And what are you going to do today?" she asked. "Apart from drinking that dreadful wine with those dreadful men?" "I shall be defending the innocent," I said. "You will be defending somebody," she said. "Innocence is never your concern. Money should be. One does not win these exchanges. One survives them." I took my hat, my papers, and what remained of my self-respect, and fled to Fleet Street. Pomeroy's outer sanctum was half empty. The stools looked resigned. Jack Pomeroy nodded at me with the sympathy of a man who has seen many husbands arrive in the same condition. "Early, Mr. Rumpole," he said. "Domestic pressure," I replied. "The sort which ought to be regulated by statute." I had barely tasted the first medicinal mouthful when Henry Trench appeared. Henry does not enter a room. He drifts into it, as though carried by a draught from an unpaid invoice. He was trembling. He held a brief, as if it might explode. "Mr. Rumpole," he said, "I am sorry to disturb you, sir, but there is a matter. A lady. An old lady, sir." "Henry," I said, "if I had wished to be disturbed, I should have stayed at home." "It is Froxbury Mansions," he whispered, as though the very building might overhear. That gave me pause. I have known murder. I have known fraud. I have even known the occasional act of malice disguised as a courtesy. But Froxbury Mansions is the battlefield on which my domestic life is fought. "What has happened?" I asked. Henry put the brief on the table, careful not to spill the claret, and began to explain in the tone of a man reporting a natural disaster. "Bonnie Bernard telephoned, sir. He has been instructed. Mrs. Mabel Cragg, sir. A widow, a pensioner. She has been charged." "Charged with what?" I asked, though I had already guessed it would not be jaywalking. "Handling stolen goods, sir," Henry said. "Under the Theft Act, 1968. Handling stolen goods. The police love that charge. It is wonderfully elastic. It stretches from hardened villains to gentle souls who have merely accepted a Christmas present without demanding a receipt." "What goods?" I asked. "A silver tea service, sir," Henry said, "and a teapot, a large one, silver. The police say it was taken in a burglary." "A burglary at Froxbury Mansions," I said. Henry nodded, miserable. "It was taken from the flat of Mr. Julian Peveril, sir. He is the complainant." "Of course he is," I murmured. "Froxbury has many types. The Peverils of this world live on the top floors, with carpets that soften one's footsteps, and neighbours who soft-pedal their own sins." "And Mrs. Cragg?" I asked. "She lives in the same block, sir," Henry said. "Lower down. The police found the teapot in her cupboard." "Found it?" I repeated. Henry looked away, as though the word itself had an unpleasant odour. "Inspector Sneed, sir," he said. "He described it as a routine visit." "Routine," I said. "Yes, a routine visit, the sort where they come in, make themselves at home, and leave with your liberty." I pushed the brief aside and took another sip of claret. "One must prepare oneself for the Met. Have you seen Mrs. Cragg?" I asked. "Yes, sir," Henry said, brightening slightly. "She came to chambers. She waited." "Very politely, sir. She had knitting." "A dangerous criminal," I said. "Did she confess to anything, Henry?" "No, sir. She said she did not know it was stolen. She said it was lent to her." "Lent?" I said. Henry nodded. "For a tenant's tea, sir," he said. "A vintage theme." "A theme," I repeated. "In Froxbury. That is like putting lipstick on a statute." Henry began to fuss in his bag and produced a photograph. Bonnie Bernard, for all his faults, does at least provide paper. It showed a teapot. I had seen kinder shapes in municipal architecture. The lid was chipped. "Charming," I said. If one wanted to serve tea and discourage conversation— Mrs. Cragg had arrived by then, led in by Henry as though she might bolt. She was small, neat, and anxious in the way of people who have never expected to meet the criminal law. Her face had the look of someone who says sorry when other people bump into her. "Mr. Rumpole," she said, standing as if I were a vicar. "Please sit down, Mrs. Cragg," I said. "We are not in court yet." She sat, hands folded. Her handbag looked inexpensive and honest. "I do not understand it," she said. "I did not steal anything. I would not. I have lived in the same place for 20 years. "That is often what the guilty say," I told her. "But in your case I am inclined to believe it." Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away with the discipline of her generation. "They came in," she said. "The policeman. He said he only wanted to ask questions. Then they looked in the cupboard." "Did you let them in?" I asked. "I thought I had to," she said. "He said it would look bad if I did not." "That is one of their favorite hymns," I said. "It has many verses." She took a breath. "The teapot was already there," she said. "I mean, I had put it there, but it was not mine." "Whose was it?" I asked. She hesitated, as though the answer might offend the ceiling. "Mr. Peveril's," she said. "He lent it. He said we should have something proper for the tea. He said it would look nice." "Did it?" I asked. Her mouth tightened. "It looked silver," she said, "and heavy." "Did he give it to you personally?" I asked. She nodded. "He brought it down," she said, "with the tray. He was very friendly then." "And when was this tenant's tea?" I asked. "A few weeks before the burglary," she said. "In the committee room. There is always a committee room in blocks of flats. It is where friendliness goes to die." "And after the tea?" I said. "I washed it," she said. I polished it. I put it away. I meant to take it back, but then he was busy, and I did not like to trouble him. I could already hear the prosecution's voice in my head, smooth as satin. So you kept it, Mrs. Cragg. You kept a valuable teapot in your cupboard. What innocent explanation can there be? I leaned forward. Mrs. Cragg, I said, do you have any paperwork about this tea? A note? A list? Anything from the managing agents? She frowned. There was a notice, she said, on the board by the lift, about the tea, and about donations for charity. A notice, I repeated. Henry, behind her, made a small sound. Henry is a clerk, but he has a nose for paper. I can check with the managing agents, sir, he said. There is usually something, a circular, a memo. Bless you, Henry, I said. You see, Mrs. Cragg, what we need is the sort of dull document that no one reads. Those are often the most truthful. She looked at me, uncertain. But why would Mr. Peveril say he did not lend it? She asked. That, I said, is the question which turns a teapot into an exhibit. At that moment Claude Erskine-Brown swept into Pomeroy's, looking as if he had come to sing an aria. Rumpole, he boomed. I might have known you would be here, corrupting the morning with your plonk. Claude, I said, meet Mrs. Cragg. She is accused of possessing an object too ugly to be stolen. Claude glanced at the photograph, and his eyebrows rose. Good God, he said. That thing. Surely she should plead guilty at once, to spare the jury. I never plead guilty, I said. And neither will Mrs. Cragg. Claude sniffed, as though my principles offended him. Some judges, he said, have very little patience with sentimental defences. Then we shall give them something else, I replied. We shall give them doubt. Mrs. Cragg stood, ready to leave, as if she feared we would all be arrested for talking. Mr. Rumpole, she said, will I have to go to prison? I looked at her, at the careful coat, the knitted scarf, the hands that had probably made more meals than Inspector Sneed had made arrests. No, I said, not if I can help it. The law is not supposed to be a machine for grinding down harmless people, even when it tries. When she had gone, Henry hovering like a worried guardian, I finished my claret and gathered the brief. Outside, Fleet Street was wet and grey. London looked, as it often does, like a city that has been cross-examined by its own weather. I had a teapot, a cupboard, a routine visit, and a complainant with a fondness for committees. I also had a clerk who could smell a memorandum at 50 yards. If there is a golden thread to truth, it is often tied to the dullest piece of paper in the building. And, in Froxbury Mansions, paper has a way of turning up when it feels like it. Chapter 2. The Porter's Log. Chambers at 3 Equity Court has never pretended to be a place of joy, but it does have one comfort. If you sit still long enough, somebody will bring you a brief, and you can forget your own life in favor of someone else's disaster. I arrived to find Henry already at his desk, arranging papers with the care of a man building a small dam against chaos. "Any news from the managing agents?" I asked. Henry looked up, hopeful and frightened at once. "I have telephoned, sir," he said. "They say they will call back." "They always say that," I replied. "Managing agents promise the way burglars apologize. It costs them nothing." Phillida had her door half open, as though she expected a client to attempt escape. She looked up from a file. "What is the morning's tragedy?" she asked. "An elderly widow," I said, "and a silver teapot." Phillida's expression did not change, but her eyes sharpened. "Handling?" she said. "Theft Act 1968, I replied. "Inspector Sneed. Routine visit. Cupboard search." Phillida made a note. "You will want the burglary photographs," she said, "and the schedule of exhibits, if they have one." "Bless you, Portia," I said. "Ask for everything. If they refuse, ask again with a letter." Claude Erskine-Brown chose that moment to appear, swinging his umbrella as if it were a sceptre. "Rumpole," he said, "you look as if you have spent the night in a public house." "That," I said, "is because I have." Claude shook his head, as though my moral decay embarrassed him personally. "I am prosecuting today," he announced. "A matter of import. The Crown needs a steady hand." "The Crown," I said, "always believes that. It is rarely correct." He peered at the brief on my desk. "Handling stolen silver?" he said. "A pity. These cases are quite straightforward. Possession, inference, conviction." "I am delighted you have explained my profession," I said. "Now kindly go and do it elsewhere." Claude sniffed and vanished, no doubt to polish his opinions. I sat with Henry and went through the papers. Mrs. Cragg's statement was short, plain, and full of the kind of detail that does not sound invented. The tea, the committee room, Mr. Peveril bringing down the service, the thought that she ought not to bother him about returning it. The police statement, by contrast, had the familiar smell of certainty. Inspector Sneed had written as if he had caught Fagin with his hand in the till. "Routine inquiries at Froxbury Mansions," he wrote. Mrs. Cragg appeared nervous. "Cupboard opened. Silver teapot observed. Mrs. Cragg unable to provide a satisfactory explanation." "Satisfactory," I said aloud. "To whom?" "The Met." Henry hovered. "Mr. Rumpole, sir," he said, "if she is convicted, it could be very serious. She is old. Prison is hard." "Prison is hard for everyone," I said. "It is merely harder for the people who do not belong there." The telephone rang. Henry seized it as if it were evidence. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I see, thank you. Yes, I will." He put the receiver down carefully. "The managing agents have agreed to see me," he said, "this afternoon. They said there may be a file about the tenant's function." "Good," I said. "Files are like witnesses. They pretend not to remember, and then somebody finds the right page." I decided to visit Froxbury Mansions. If the police had tramped through Mrs. Cragg's kitchen, I could at least look at the scene of the alleged offence without leaving muddy boots. The lift at Froxbury still smelled faintly of polish and suspicion. The notice board by the entrance was crowded with faded announcements about rubbish, parking, and the moral failings of neighbours. I examined it while a woman with a small dog watched me as if I were a Jehovah's Witness. Most of the notices were dull. That is why they matter. Somewhere among them might be the kind of paper that saves a harmless person. The porter, a large man with a tidy moustache and the expression of someone who knows everything but prefers not to say it, sat behind the desk. "Mr. Rumpole," I said, showing him my card, "I am here about Mrs. Cragg." The porter's face softened by a fraction. "Nice lady," he said. "Keeps herself to herself. Always says good morning. And yet the police have decided she is a receiver of stolen goods," I said. "Remarkable." He shrugged, a movement that suggested he had seen the police do many remarkable things. "They were here last week," he said. "Two of them. They asked questions." "Did they ask you?" I said. "Yes," he replied. "I told them about the burglary. I told them what I knew." "And what do you know?" I asked. He reached for a large book, its cover worn, its pages ruled, the porter's log, the gospel according to the ground floor. "I keep a record," he said. "Deliveries, visitors, workmen, people who forget their keys. A work of literature," I murmured. He opened it and ran a finger down a page. "The burglary night," he said. "There was a man. Said he was from the water board." "The water board?" I said. "They are always burgling. It is in the nature of plumbing." "He had a tool bag," the porter continued. "He signed in. I wrote down the time." "And did you check his identification?" I asked. The porter gave me a look which suggested I had asked whether he performed surgery. "He had a badge," he said. "Looked official. People do not like to argue with badges." "Badges?" I said. The common passport to other people's cupboards. He showed me the entry. The handwriting was careful. The time, the name, the flat number. It was the sort of detail the police love until it points away from their favourite suspect. "Did anyone else visit Mr. Peveril's flat around that time?" I asked. The porter turned a page. "Delivery boy," he said. "Flowers. Then a taxi later. Lady leaving. Late." "A lady?" I said. He nodded. "Blonde," he said. "Smart coat. Always looks rushed. Comes and goes." "Does she visit often?" I asked. He hesitated, then shrugged again. "Some people have company," he said. I thanked him and copied the relevant entries into my notebook. The porter looked faintly relieved, as though he had long wanted someone to take his log seriously. Mrs. Cragg's door was a few floors down. I knocked and waited. I could hear a radio murmuring inside, and the faint clink of crockery. Ordinary life, continuing under the shadow of a charge sheet. She opened the door at once, apron still tied. "Mr. Rumpole," she said. "Oh, I did not expect you." "I rarely expect myself," I said. "May I come in?" Her flat was small, clean, and modest. A framed photograph of a wedding, long past, stood on a shelf. A smell of tea and furniture polish hung in the air. I sat at her little table while she offered me biscuits with the seriousness of a hostess on the Queen's visit. "Tell me again," I said. "Exactly when Mr. Peveril gave you the teapot." She thought carefully. "On the Thursday," she said. "The notice said the tea was Saturday. He brought it down in the evening. He said we ought to have something nice." "And did he say it was alone?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "He said, 'Only for the tea, Mrs. Cragg.'" "Did anyone else hear him?" I asked. She frowned. "Mrs. Gutteridge was there," she said, "from the 3rd floor. She was helping me put out the cups." "Mrs. Gutteridge," I repeated. "And does Mrs. Gutteridge have a view on these matters?" Mrs. Cragg's mouth tightened. "She has views on everything," she said. "But she saw him bring it. A neighbour witness. Useful and dangerous. Neighbours do not always tell lies, but they do sometimes tell stories." I stood to leave. "I am going to see Mr. Peveril," I said. "There may be a misunderstanding." Her eyes widened. "He will not like it," she said. "He is welcome not to like it," I replied. "I shall still do it." Mr. Peveril's flat was higher up. The carpet was thick, the door was painted a darker shade of importance. When he opened it, he looked at me as if I had brought bad news about his investments. "Yes," he said. "Mr. Julian Peveril?" I said. "Horace Rumpole. I act for Mrs. Cragg." His face took on a different expression. Not anger. Embarrassment, quickly masked. "Oh," he said. That, I replied, is what the Old Bailey calls a case." He drew himself up. "The police told me she had it," he said. "In her cupboard." "Yes," I said. "And she says you lent it." He blinked. "I did nothing of the sort," he said, too quickly. I looked past him. The flat was neat. Expensive. It had the same air of careful display as a shop window. "Mr. Peveril," I said, "did you take part in a tenant's tea?" His eyes flickered. A small movement, but I have seen witnesses crack for less. "There was a function," he said. "People wanted to create community." "Did you provide silver?" I asked. "I have silver," he said. "I do not distribute it." "Then how did your teapot reach Mrs. Cragg's cupboard?" I asked. He began to speak, stopped, and then said something I had not expected. "It must have been taken," he said, "by the burglar. He must have put it there." "To frame an elderly widow?" I asked. Mr. Peveril coloured. "I do not know," he said, "but I did not lend it." I nodded, as though I accepted that a burglar had staged a tea party as part of his getaway. "Very well. I said. "Then you will not mind if I ask the managing agents for their records, nor if I ask the porter for his log." His mouth tightened. "You do what you like," he said. I left him standing in his expensive doorway, looking like a man who had suddenly remembered he had said something foolish at a committee meeting. Downstairs, the rain had started again. London does that. It makes you feel you are always walking back into court. I returned to chambers with the Porter's Times in my pocket, a neighbour called Mrs. Gutteridge on my list, and a complainant who protested too much. The Teapot had begun to look less like stolen property and more like a monument to someone's vanity. And vanity, in my experience, is the most common motive in the whole criminal calendar. Chapter 3. The Memorandum of Respectability. There are days in chambers when the very walls seem to sweat paperwork. Files multiply on Henry's desk like rabbits, and every solicitor who telephones appears to believe that the criminal law is a sort of personal inconvenience which I can remove with a mild smile. On the Mrs. Cragg morning, I had barely hung my gown when Phillida appeared at my door with a thin bundle of paper in her hand and the look of Portia returning from Venice with the deed. "Disclosure," she said. "You have persuaded the Crown to part with its treasures?" I asked. "They have provided the burglary photographs," she replied, "and the exhibit list. Nothing else, of course. They are saving their secrets for the day of judgment." I took the photographs. They were the usual police effort, lit as though the scene had been discovered at the bottom of a coal cellar. Still, one could make out the important point. The teapot in the picture had a chip on the lid. Not a polite little blemish, a distinctive bite, as if some previous owner had attempted to silence it with a hammer. "Mrs. Cragg's teapot has the same chip," I said. "That proves it is the same teapot," Phillida replied. "It does not prove how it got into her cupboard." "The law," I said, "has always struggled with cupboards. They contain too much truth." Phillida turned to the exhibit list. "They have catalogued the tea service," she said. "Teapot, tray, sugar bowl, milk jug, 12 spoons. They have not mentioned the table linen, but there is a photograph of lace on the sideboard." "Police," I said. "They notice silver, not lace." Phillida looked up. "Your client's explanation remains the same?" she asked. "That Mr. Peveril lent it for a tenant's tea," I said, "and now denies it, presumably because he has realized he looked ridiculous." "Then you need evidence of the tea," she said. "Minutes, notices, anything." "Henry is stalking the managing agent," I replied. "If there is a document in London that nobody wants to read, Henry will find it." Phillida gave a small nod and left, already thinking about letters and deadlines. "She is not sentimental, Phillida. She is competent. It is more useful." I went down to the outer office, where Henry sat with the telephone at his elbow like a life-raft. "Any sign?" I asked. Henry opened his mouth, and the telephone rang. He grabbed it. "Yes," he said. "Yes, this is he. Yes, thank you. Yes, of course, I will." He put it down and looked at me with an expression that was almost joyful. "They have a memorandum," he said, "from the time of the charity display. They have found it in the file." "A memorandum," I said. "Henry, you will be canonized." "They will let me collect a copy," he said, "but only if I attend in person. They are very strict about their procedures." "Managing agents," I said, "guardians of civilization." Henry rushed off, clutching his umbrella and his sense of purpose. I remained, reading the photographs again. The complainant's flat looked like a shrine to money. The silver sat on a sideboard, arranged for admiration. There were small cards beside some pieces, as if they were museum exhibits. It did not take a genius to see that Mr. Peveril enjoyed being regarded as a man of taste. I looked at the final photograph. The sideboard after the burglary, or what the police called a burglary. Empty spaces. A drawer open. A chair moved. It was disorder, but controlled. The sort of disorder which makes people feel violated while leaving their art books untouched. Claude Erskine-Brown appeared in the doorway, carrying his own umbrella like a standard. "Rumpole," he said, "you look preoccupied. Not another hopeless defence?" "An old lady," I replied, "a teapot, and the full weight of the crown bearing down on a cupboard." Claude gave a little smile. "If she had sense," he said, "she would plead." "I never plead guilty," I said, "and I never encourage anyone else to do so, unless they have murdered their solicitor." Claude looked offended, as though I had accused him of humour. "I shall be in court this afternoon," he said, "before Mr. Justice Mortlake. A matter of corruption. Real crime, Rumpole." "The only corruption I care about," I said, "is the quality of claret at Pomeroy's." Claude departed, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive soap. I decided it was time to see Mrs. Gutteridge. She lived on the 3rd floor of Froxbury Mansions and opened her door as though she had been waiting for my knock all morning. Some people simply hunger for a case. "Yes," she said, though her eyes said, "At last." "Mrs. Gutteridge," I said, "I am Horace Rumpole. I act for Mrs. Cragg." Her face brightened. "Poor Mabel," she said at once. "I told them they had it wrong. But do they listen? Of course they do not. They never listen." "Do you know how the teapot came into her possession?" I asked. "I know exactly," she said. "Mr. Peveril brought it down. I saw him. He was showing off." "Showing off?" I said. "There was a tea," she said. "The residence committee. Vintage theme. As if we lived in a stately home. He wanted everyone to see his silver. It was all community and standards. Then he forgot about it. Men like that forget other people exist." "Did you hear him say it was alone?" I asked. "I heard him say, 'We can leave it with Mrs. Cragg,'" she replied. "He said she was reliable." Reliable. Imagine. That is why they suspect her now, because she is reliable. "Mrs. Gutteridge," I said, "did you attend any meeting about a charity display?" Her eyes narrowed. "Oh, that," she said. "Yes, they had the silver out in the committee room, on tables, with little labels. People made donations. Mr. Peveril loved it. He stood there like an auctioneer." "And was there paperwork?" I asked. "There is always paperwork," she said. "Notices, minutes. The managing agents love paperwork. They drown us in it." "Did you keep any?" I asked. Her mouth tightened. "I do not keep rubbish," she said. "But I remember." "Memory," I said, "is a fine thing, but juries prefer paper." Mrs. Gutteridge leaned forward. "I will come to court," she said. "I will tell them what I saw. Mabel is no thief. She is frightened of crossing the road." "Thank you," I said. "That is brave." "It is not brave," she replied. "It is necessary." I left her flat with the useful knowledge that Mr. Peveril had not only lent the silver, but had enjoyed doing so. Enjoyment is a dangerous thing in court. It makes a witness careless. Back at Chambers, Henry returned as if chased. He carried a single sheet of paper in a plastic sleeve, the way one carries a fragile relic. "I have it, sir," he said. He handed it to me. It was headed with the name of the managing agents and the sort of language that makes one long for illiteracy. But there, in the middle, was the line I wanted. During the charity display, items were temporarily distributed to residents for the purposes of the tenants' tea and community function. And at the bottom, a signature, Julian Peveril. I looked at it for a long moment. "Well," I said, "that is awkward." Henry nodded, solemn. "I thought you would say that, sir." Phillida appeared again, drawn by the scent of something useful. "What is awkward?" she asked. I passed her the memorandum. She read it once, then again. "This is very good," she said. "It is very bad," I replied. "For Mr. Peveril." Henry hovered. Will it be enough? He asked. It will help, I said. But the police will say it proves nothing. They will say a paper does not explain why the teapot stayed in Mrs. Cragg's cupboard. Phillida folded the memorandum and handed it back. Then you make it explain, she said. You show the jury what really happened. Vanity, embarrassment, the small lies people tell to protect their dignity. Dignity, I said, is the most fragile exhibit in the whole court. I took my gown, my papers, and Henry's precious memorandum. If Mr. Peveril had signed that document, he had placed his own hand on the teapot. Now he would have to explain why he was pretending otherwise. And that, in my experience, is where respectable men begin to stumble. Chapter 4. The Police Hymn. If there is one phrase which has the power to turn my stomach quicker than a bad oyster, it is the police expression, routine visit. A routine visit is what the clergy do when they call upon the sick. When the Metropolitan Police perform one, it usually involves a notebook, a boot in the doorway, and a sudden interest in other people's cupboards. Bonnie Bernard's solicitor's office was in a street where all the buildings seemed to have been designed to discourage hope. Bonnie himself had the mournful look of a man who has spent his life explaining the criminal courts to people who believed they were above them. "Rumpole," he said, shaking my hand as though I were already carrying contagion, "I have never known such a daft business. A pensioner, silver, the police are like dogs. They smell metal and start barking." "They also smell fear," I replied, "and Mrs. Cragg is practically drenched in it." Bonnie pushed a file across his desk. "The Crown will offer a plea," he said, "a conditional discharge, perhaps a small fine. She will be told to accept it and go home. That is how they do it. They call it mercy. And it is really convenience," I said. "For the police, for the prosecution, for the court list, for everyone except the old lady who now thinks she is a criminal." Bonnie said, "You can fight if you like," he said, "but she is frightened. She may want it over." "I know," I said. "That is why I must fight. Harmless people plead guilty because they cannot bear the process. Then the system congratulates itself for being efficient." Bonnie looked at me as if I were a man who had refused an anesthetic. "You will need to be careful," he said. "The judge is Mr. Justice Mortlake." "Mortlake," I said. "A man who believes compassion is a loophole." Bonnie nodded. "He does not like excuses," he said, "and he will not like your poetry." "That," I replied, "is his misfortune." I left Bonnie and went straight to see Mrs. Cragg. If the Crown intended to offer her a way out, it was only fair she should hear the warning from me, not from some brisk young solicitor who thought a conviction was a technicality. She opened her door before I knocked twice. I suspected she had been standing behind it, listening for doom. "Mr. Rumpole," she said. "They telephoned. The solicitor said there might be a way to finish it." "There is always a way to finish it," I said. "The question is what you finish as." I sat at her kitchen table again. The biscuits were already out. She had the nervous hospitality of someone expecting bailiffs. "They may suggest you admit something," I said. "They will call it a sensible course. They will say you will not go to prison, that you can put it behind you." Her hands tightened around her mug. "I cannot admit it," she said. "I did not do it." "Exactly," I replied. "And if you admit it, it becomes true, not in fact, perhaps, but in law. And law has a way of sticking." She looked down. "I do not want trouble," she said. "No one does," I said. "Yet trouble has an unerring taste for the innocent." Her eyes met mine. "Will it be dreadful?" she asked. "It will be unpleasant," I said. "But we have paper. We have Mrs. Gutheridge. We have a porter's log. We have a complainant who is already trying to forget his own signature." That last point seemed to steady her. The idea that Mr. Peveril might be uncomfortable was a small comfort. "Then I will do what you say," she said. "Splendid," I replied. "That is what my clients always say just before disaster, but we shall pretend it is an omen." On my way back to Chambers, I committed the fatal domestic error of going home for my lunch. One should never enter Froxbury Mansions voluntarily in daylight. It encourages she who must be obeyed. Hilda was in the sitting-room, armed with a magazine and a look of inquiry which suggested she had already formed conclusions. "You have been out," she said. "I have been working," I replied. "Working?" she repeated. "Is that what you call it when you loiter in wine-bars?" "I was not loitering," I said. "I was conducting professional reflection." "And what is your professional reflection today?" she asked. "A silver teapot," I said. Hilda put down her magazine, as though I had announced a scandal. "In this building," she said. "Do not tell me you have encouraged the neighbours to bring their rubbish to you." "It is not rubbish," I said. "It is allegedly stolen, and it belongs to a man who uses it to impress committee meetings." Hilda's mouth tightened. "Silver," she said. "If we had silver, it would not be wandering about other people's flats." "If we had silver," I replied, "it would probably have been sold to pay for Nick's latest scheme." Hilda gave me a look which implied Nick's latest scheme was my fault. "You should stop taking these ridiculous cases," she said. "Old ladies and teapots. It makes you look shabby." "Shabby," I said, "is my natural state." She waved a hand. "You should think of your future," she said. "A man of your age ought to have some dignity." "My dear," I replied, "if dignity were handed out at birth, I would have missed it. I was probably in the queue for stubbornness. I escaped with my sandwich and what remained of my peace, and returned to Chambers, where Henry was waiting with the expression of a man about to deliver bad news carefully wrapped. "Inspector Sneed telephoned, sir," Henry said. "He says he is available for interview." "How generous," I replied. "Did he offer to bring the handcuffs as well?" "He said it would be at the station, sir," Henry continued. "He sounded confident." "They always do," I said. "It is their trade." The police station was a building designed to make ordinary citizens feel as if they had been caught doing something wrong merely by entering. The waiting room had old chairs, a smell of disinfectant, and a poster advising the public to cooperate. Inspector Sneed appeared eventually, tall, clean, and faintly amused by my presence. He had the look of a man who believed the world would be better if everyone carried receipts. "Mr. Rumpole," he said, "I gather you are acting for Mrs. Cragg." "I am," I replied. "A widow, a pensioner, a mastermind." Sneed's mouth twitched. "We found the stolen property," he said, "in her cupboard." "During your routine visit," I said. "It was routine enquiries," Sneed replied. "We were investigating a burglary. We spoke to residents." "And you decided to search her kitchen," I said. He folded his arms. "She consented," he said. "Did she?" I asked. "Or did you tell her it would look bad if she did not?" Sneed's eyes narrowed. For a moment he looked less amused. "We ask questions," he said. "If people are innocent, they have nothing to hide." "That," I replied, "is a nursery rhyme. It has no place in the criminal law." He leaned forward slightly. "We had information," he said. "Information," I repeated. "From where?" He hesitated, as policemen do when the word information might mean guess. "An anonymous call," he said. "A resident. Said Mrs. Cragg had silver in her flat." "A resident with a dislike of old ladies," I said. Sneed shrugged. "We followed it up," he said. "We found the teapot. That is the point." "It is not the whole point," I replied. "Tell me, Inspector, did you examine the porter's log?" Sneed looked away. "We spoke to the porter," he said. "Did you take a copy of the log entry about a man claiming to be from the Water Board?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "We have our own inquiries," he said. "And did you check whether the complainant had distributed his silver to residents for a charity display?" I asked. Sneed gave a short laugh. "That is a story she told after she was caught," he said. "It is a story supported by a memorandum signed by the complainant," I replied. That landed. It was not dramatic. It was not a confession. It was simply a piece of paper, and policemen dislike paper when it contradicts them. Sneed recovered quickly. "That will be for the court," he said. "Indeed," I replied. "And the court will also be interested in the way you obtained your exhibit. If your routine included frightening a pensioner into opening cupboards, that is not a very pretty hymn, Inspector." His eyes hardened. "Are you suggesting impropriety?" he asked. "I am suggesting haste," I replied, "and a fondness for the simplest suspect. You found silver in a clean kitchen and assumed you had caught a fence." Sneed stood. Interview finished in his mind. "We have charged her," he said. "It will be for the jury." As I left the station, I felt the familiar mixture of irritation and determination. The police had an anonymous caller, a cupboard, and a certainty. We had paper, a porter's log, and the fact that respectable men do not enjoy admitting they lent their treasures out for a tenant's tea. Back in chambers, Henry looked up anxiously. "Well, sir?" he asked. "Sneed has a hymn," I said. "Routine visit, anonymous call, cupboard exhibit. He will sing it until the jury throws fruit." Henry swallowed. "And our hymn, sir?" he asked. "Our hymn," I replied, "has a signature at the bottom. And that, Henry, is music even Mr. Justice Mortlake may be forced to hear." Chapter 5. The Residence Committee. It is a mistake to imagine that crime flourishes only in back alleys. In London it thrives in committee rooms, under fluorescent light, with minutes taken and biscuits served. Froxbury Mansions had such a room, tucked away off the foyer, and if ever a place could inspire burglary, it was that. Henry and I went there together, because Henry has a talent for looking respectable. I have the opposite talent. People see me and assume I have come to accuse them of something, which is usually correct. The managing agent's representative met us at the door. He was a young man in a suit which looked borrowed from a funeral, and he spoke as though every sentence had been approved by a board. "Mr. Trench," he said to Henry, and then glanced at me as if I were a stain. "You wish to see the file relating to the community function." "That is correct," Henry said, smiling nervously. "We are acting in a matter before the Old Bailey." The young man's face tightened with the faint alarm of someone hearing the word Old Bailey for the first time. "Yes," he said. "Well, we keep records." He led us into the committee room. A long table stood in the center. A kettle sat on a sideboard, as if the room itself had been built around the idea of lukewarm tea. There were notices pinned to a board. "Fire regulations, cleaning rota, complaints about bicycles, a society built on paper and disapproval." The managing agent produced a folder and opened it with ceremony. "There was a charity display," he said, "a residence initiative. Certain items were shown." "And temporarily distributed," I said. Henry coughed gently, a warning cough. The young man's eyes flickered. "That is noted in the memorandum," he said. "Yes." Henry held out his hand. "We would like copies of any related documents," he said. "Minutes, lists, notices." The managing agent hesitated. "Confidential," he said. "Not in the criminal courts," I replied. "Nothing is confidential when an old lady is facing a conviction." He looked as if he might argue, then thought better of it. The managing agent's courage, like his suit, had been cut for safe occasions. He produced several sheets, a notice about the charity display, a list of items, typed with the care of someone who enjoyed inventories: silver tray, teapot, sugar bowl, milk jug, spoons, a pair of candlesticks, a small silver frame, and beside the list a column headed temporary allocation. My heart warmed. A list like that is the closest thing to a confession which respectable people will ever write. Henry leaned in. "This is exactly what we need," he said. The managing agent cleared his throat. "It was done to encourage community," he said. "There is nothing improper about it." "Of course not," I replied. "It is only improper when the police pretend it never happened." The names beside the items were not many. Most people do not volunteer to hold other people's silver, even for charity. The teapot and service were allocated to Mrs. Mabel Cragg. I tapped the paper. "There we are," I said, "in black and white." She did not smuggle it in through the window. It was given to her in the name of community. The young man looked relieved, as if he had successfully removed blame from the managing agents and placed it on the criminal justice system where it belonged. "There were minutes, too," he said, almost proudly, "from the Residents' Committee meeting." He handed them over. The minutes were dull, which is a sign of authenticity. Most lies are lively. The chairman was listed. Mr. Julian Peverell. There was a line about the tea. A line about silver being displayed for donations. A line about items being distributed temporarily to responsible residents. Responsible! That was the word. It had probably been inserted by Mr. Peverell himself. "Did anyone object?" I asked. "Not at the meeting," the managing agent said. "There were one or two later complaints. People worried about insurance." "Insurance," I repeated. "A charming topic. Did you notify the insurers?" He blinked. "That would not be our role," he said. "Residents' personal property is their own concern." Then Mr. Peverell claimed on his insurance. I said, "More to myself than to him. And now he must explain why his property was not safely in his own flat." Henry looked up. "Sir," he murmured, "are you suggesting he may be embarrassed?" "Henry," I replied, "embarrassment is the engine of half the cases at the Old Bailey. People will commit perjury to avoid looking foolish at a dinner party." We took copies and left. Outside, the porter watched us with interest. "Find what you wanted?" he asked. "We found what the police did not want," I replied. He nodded slowly. "They went straight to Mrs. Cragg," he said. "They did not ask many questions." "Police work," I said. "Why search the building when you can search a cupboard?" As we spoke, the lift doors opened and a woman stepped out. Blonde hair, smart coat, the look of someone always in a hurry. She glanced at me, then at the porter, and her face changed. Not fear, recognition, quickly hidden. She went past us towards the stairs, as if she preferred not to share a lift with a barrister and a porter's gossip. I watched her go. "That is the lady who visits Mr. Peverell," the porter said quietly. "Comes and goes." "Does she have a name?" I asked. He shook his head. "Never signs in," he said. "Some people do not." I thanked him and walked out with Henry into the rain. London was damp and grey, as though it too had been left in a cupboard. Back at Chambers, Phillida read the documents without comment. Then she looked up. "This is very strong," she said. "It is very true," I replied. "Which is why Mr. Peverell will fight it." She tapped the minutes. "He signed the memorandum," she said, "and chaired the meeting. He cannot deny knowledge. He can only deny memory." "Convenient," I said. "A burglary happens, and respectable men forget their own decisions." Phillida's face remained calm. "The prosecution will still argue possession," she said. "They will say she kept it. They will say a responsible person would return it." "She is a responsible person," I replied. "That is her error. She thought she should not trouble a man above her station." Phillida nodded once. "Then you must make the jury see that," she said. She was polite. He was vain. The police were lazy. Claude Erskine Brown arrived, as if summoned by the words vain and lazy. "What are you plotting?" he asked. More fantasies about charitable burglars? I am plotting an acquittal, I said. And you, Claude, may find yourself watching. Claude sniffed. I shall be prosecuting tomorrow, he said, proud. Not your ridiculous teapot matter. The Crown has given that to a junior. A junior, I said. Then Mr. Peveril will not have satin certainty to protect him. Claude smiled. Do not underestimate respectable complainants, he said. Juries like them. Juries like stories, I replied. And his story is going to have to explain why his signature is on a list allocating silver to my client. Claude's smile faltered, which is always a pleasing sight. You have that, he said. I have it, I replied. And I have minutes, and I have a neighbour who saw him showing off. Claude recovered his pomp. Well, he said, do not expect the judge to indulge theatrics. I never do, I replied. I expect him to indulge impatience, which is even better. A witness cannot hide in impatience for long. That evening I returned to Froxbury Mansions, where she who must be obeyed awaited me with the air of a magistrate about to sentence. You are late, she said. I have been dealing with silver, I replied. Hilda's eyes narrowed. In this building? She said. I knew it. We are not safe. We shall have to change the locks. If we change the locks, I said, the police will call it suspicious. Hilda ignored that. You take these cases and drag trouble to our door, she said. Trouble is already in the building, I replied. It wears smart coats and forgets to sign in. Hilda started. What does that mean? She asked. It means, I said, that tomorrow I shall go to the Old Bailey and persuade a jury that an ugly teapot is not proof of a wicked mind. Hilda snorted. You and your principles, she said. They will be the death of you. They have not managed it yet, I replied, though they have tried. I went to bed with papers on my bedside table, and the sound of Hilda turning the pages of her magazine as if each one were an accusation. Tomorrow there would be a judge, a jury, a pensioner trembling in the dock, and a man of standing trying to pretend he had never lent his silver to impress the Residence Committee. The Old Bailey does not care much for teapots, but it cares, sometimes, for truth. And I intended to serve it, even if it came in chipped silver. Chapter 6. Mr. Justice Mortlake's Patience. The Old Bailey in the morning has a particular atmosphere. It is not quite fear, though fear is certainly present. It is more like the smell of damp coats and old files. People have brought their lives to be sorted by strangers, and most of them would rather be anywhere else. I arrived with Henry at my elbow, clutching the brief as if it were a life-belt. Henry always looks as though he expects the building to collapse. "You have everything, sir?" he asked. "Henry," I said, "I have my gown, my wig, and my outraged sense of justice. If that is not enough, the Crown will have to lend me something." He gave a small, anxious laugh, which did not mean amusement. We found Mrs. Cragg in the corridor outside the court, sitting on a bench with Bonnie Bernard beside her. She held her handbag on her lap as though it might be taken as an exhibit. She stood when she saw me. "Mr. Rumpole," she said, "is it going to be very bad?" "It is going to be very legal," I replied, "which is bad for everyone, but worse for the innocent." Bonnie rose and shook my hand with the air of a man handing over a patient. "They have offered the plea again," he murmured. "And she has refused again," I said. Bonnie glanced at Mrs. Cragg, then back at me. "She is determined," he said, as if this were a medical condition. "She is right," I replied. "That is the difference." Inside court, the usher called names. The jury filed in, looking as though they had been abducted from ordinary life, and were still not sure why. Mr. Justice Mortlake arrived with the briskness of a man who prefers the law without people. He was not a villain. Judges are rarely villains. He was simply narrow. There is a difference. A narrow judge believes that anything outside his personal experience is either suspicious or irrelevant. He looked down at the dock, then at counsel, and then at his list. "Handling stolen goods," he said. "Mrs. Cragg, is this really necessary?" The words were addressed to the court, but the message was for me. He believed the case ought to have been disposed of before it reached his patients. "It is necessary, my lord," I said. "My client maintains her innocence." Mr. Justice Mortlake's mouth tightened. "Of course," he said. "They all do." I glanced at Mrs. Cragg. She had gone pale. "One must never let a client believe the judge is hostile before the first witness speaks. The judge may be hostile, but the client should not notice." The prosecution was not Claude Erskine Brown, to my relief. It was a junior, a young man with neat hair and a suit which still looked new. He rose with the confidence of someone who has never defended a frightened pensioner. "My lord," he began, "this is a straightforward case. The complainant, Mr. Julian Peveril, had his flat burgled. His silver tea service, including a teapot, was stolen. A few days later, police officers, during routine inquiries, attended the building and found the distinctive teapot in the defendant's cupboard. Routine inquiries. There it was, the hymn. I felt my wig itch. The young man went on, repeating the same points, with the calm certainty of youth. Possession, suspicion, inference. He spoke as though an old lady and a cupboard were enough to convict. When my turn came, I stood and looked at the jury. "Members of the jury," I said, "my learned friend would have you believe that because something was found in my client's cupboard, she must have known it was stolen. That is not the law. People do not become criminals simply because other people's property ends up in their homes, especially in a block of flats where respectable neighbors borrow things, lend things, and then forget they ever did." The judge lifted his eyes slightly at the word respectable. It sounded like a challenge. "The question," I continued, "is how that silver came into Mrs. Cragg's possession, and whether she knew it was stolen. You will hear evidence that there was an innocent explanation. You will hear that there was, in fact, a reason for the silver to be in her cupboard, which has nothing to do with burglary and everything to do with vanity." The prosecution junior frowned, as if vanity were not a proper subject for the criminal courts. The first witness was Inspector Sneed. He entered the witness box with the air of a man who has never been wrong and who would regard any suggestion otherwise as a personal insult. He swore the oath in a voice that sounded as though it had been recited many times. The prosecutor took him through his story. Burglary reported. Routine inquiries. Anonymous information. Visit to Mrs. Cragg. Consent. Cupboard. Teapot. Arrest. Charge. When it came to my turn, I rose. "Inspector Sneed," I said, "you describe your visit to my client as routine." "It was," he replied. "A routine that included searching her kitchen cupboard," I said. "We were investigating a burglary," he said. "We had information." "An anonymous call?" I said. "Yes," he replied, and his eyes held mine in that police way which means, "Do not ask me more." "But you did not check the porter's log carefully," I said. "We spoke to the porter," he replied. "That was not my question," I said. "Did you examine the log?" Sneed paused, then chose his answer. "Not in detail," he said. "Not in detail," I repeated. "So you did not see the entry about a man who signed in claiming to be from the water board?" The prosecutor jumped up. "My lord, I do not see the relevance. This is a handling matter." Mr. Justice Mortlake looked irritated at being asked to think. "Mr. Rumpole," he said, "do not waste time. We are not trying the burglary." "I am obliged, my lord," I said. "But the Crown relies on the fact of a burglary, and on the inference that my client must be connected with it. I am entitled to test the investigation which led to her being charged." Mr. Justice Mortlake made a small motion with his hand. "Proceed," he said, "but keep it short." I turned back to Sneed. "So you did not pursue that line," I said. "We pursued many lines," he replied. "And did you investigate whether the complainant had distributed his silver to residents for a tenant's function?" I asked. Sneed's jaw tightened. He did not like this question. That pleased me. "We were not told that at the time," he said. "You were not told," I repeated. "Or you did not ask?" He did not answer the second part. Policemen rarely do. "Inspector," I said, "did you ask my client whether there had been a tenant's tea?" He hesitated. "She mentioned something," he said. "And you dismissed it?" I said. "We found stolen property," he replied, "in her cupboard." "There are many ways property can end up in a cupboard," I said, "especially in a building where neighbors distribute silver for charity displays." The jury looked a little more awake. The word charity is like a bell. It does not prove innocence, but it changes the flavor of suspicion. Sneed gave a short, controlled sigh. "That is a matter for the court," he said. "It is," I replied. "And the court will also consider whether your routine was really a rush to the easiest suspect." Mr. Justice Mortlake cleared his throat. "Mr. Rumpole," he said, "we have heard your point. Move on." I bowed slightly. "As my lord pleases," I said. Sneed stepped down, still certain, but with a small crack in his confidence. It was not much, but in court small cracks are everything. The porter came next. He was steady, polite, and far more convincing than Sneed because he did not sound as though he had rehearsed. He spoke of his log, of the people who came and went, of the so-called water-board man. Then Mrs. Gutteridge took the box. She was not a witness who needed encouragement. She looked at the jury as though she had been waiting years to address an audience. "Yes," she said firmly. "There was a tenant's tea. Mr. Peveril brought down the silver. He wanted everyone to see it. He said we should have standards." The prosecution junior shifted in his seat. He had not expected standards to appear as evidence. As she spoke, I caught sight of Mr. Peveril at the back of the court, waiting his turn. He sat stiffly, face composed, as if he were attending a concert he did not enjoy. Beside him, a blonde woman sat with her hands in her lap, looking straight ahead. The woman from the lift, the one who did not sign in. I felt a small tightening in my mind. A witness can be a fact. A companion can be a clue. The judge called a short adjournment before the next witness. Mrs. Cragg looked at me, frightened. "Is it going all right?" she whispered. "It is going as well as it can," I said. "We have shown the jury that cupboards are not proof. Now we must show them why a respectable man would deny a loan he once boasted about." "And will he?" she asked. I looked at Mr. Peveril, sitting with his shoulders rigid, and at the blonde woman beside him. "He will try not to," I replied. That is what makes it interesting. Chapter 7. The Satin Denial. The Old Bailey corridor during an adjournment is a place where every human emotion is displayed in public, usually beside a notice about fire exits. Solicitors hiss into telephones. Prison officers stand like furniture. Witnesses drift about, with the stunned expression of people who have wandered into the wrong theatre. Mrs. Cragg sat on the bench again, hands folded on her handbag, as if holding it still might prevent her whole life sliding off her lap. "Mr. Rumpole," she said. "That woman, the one sitting with Mr. Peveril." She looked at me. "Many people look at defendants," I said. "It is one of the smaller pleasures of the criminal courts." She looked as if she knew me. She whispered. "That," I replied, "is a more interesting category." Henry had vanished to find tea, which is his answer to most crises. Bonnie Bernard hovered at a polite distance, wearing the resigned air of a man who has tried to explain to clients that court is not designed for their comfort. I stood where I could see the complainant. Mr. Julian Peveril spoke to the prosecutor in short, stiff sentences. The blonde woman stood close, but not close enough to look domestic. She did not touch his arm. She did not meet his eye. She simply stayed there, watchful, as though her presence was a form of insurance. Claude Erskine-Brown, gliding by like a ship under full sail, paused when he saw me. "Still battling with household utensils?" he murmured. "Still floating on your own importance?" I replied. Claude smiled. "Be careful, Rumpole," he said. "Respectable witnesses have a way of being believed." "Respectable witnesses have a way of lying neatly," I said. "That is why they are dangerous." Claude wandered off, satisfied with his own warning. I returned to my papers. The managing agent's list was folded neatly in my pocket, like a small weapon. The memorandum, with Mr. Peveril's signature at the bottom, sat between my fingers. Paper does not raise its voice. It simply waits. The usher called us back in. Mr. Justice Mortlake was already looking bored, which was his way of declaring control. The jury filed in, some of them staring at the ceiling as though hoping for mercy to descend. The prosecution called Mr. Julian Peveril. He entered the witness box with care. He was not a fool. He knew the danger of looking anything less than composed. He wore a good suit and an expression of injured propriety, as though the burglary had been an affront to civilization. He took the oath in a clear voice. He did not look at Mrs. Cragg. The junior prosecutor went through the Crown's story, the burglary, the missing silver, the distress, the police visit, the recovery of the teapot. Mr. Peveril spoke politely, without warmth. He described his tea service as though it were a relative. "It was inherited," he said. "It has sentimental value." "The teapot?" asked the prosecutor. "Yes," said Mr. Peveril, and his mouth tightened slightly. "The teapot as well." When my turn came, I stood and adjusted my gown. There are moments in court when one can feel the case turn, not with a shout, with a question. "Mr. Peveril," I said, "you live in Froxbury Mansions." "Yes," he replied. "And you take an interest in the affairs of the building?" I said. "I take a reasonable interest," he said. "One has to. Standards matter." "Standards?" I repeated. "Indeed. You chaired the Residence Committee, did you not?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I have attended," he said. "That is not an answer," I replied. "Did you chair it?" "I have chaired meetings," he said. "Thank you," I said. "Now, do you recall a tenant's tea with a vintage theme?" His eyes flickered towards the judge, as if asking for rescue. Mr. Justice Mortlake offered none. He simply stared, impatient. "I recall there was some function," Mr. Peveril said. "And did you take part?" I asked. "I may have been present," he replied. "You may have been," I said. "Mr. Peveril, you either were or you were not. Were you?" "Yes," he said, annoyed. "I was present." "And did you bring silver to that function?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. "Certainly not." There was a small silence. One can almost hear a lie land, like a bad note in a hymn. "I see," I said. "So when Mrs. Cragg says you brought a tea service and left it with her, she is mistaken." "She is lying," Mr. Peveril said, and then, realizing how that sounded, added, "Or confused." "Confused," I repeated. "An elderly widow confused about a heavy teapot in her cupboard." He shifted his weight. "I did not lend it," he said. "I keep my property secure." "Secure," I said. "And yet it was stolen from you." "It was burgled," he replied, stiffly. "Yes," I said. "Now let us turn to paperwork. You enjoy paperwork, do you not, Mr. Peveril?" He stared at me. "I beg your pardon?" "The managing agents keep records," I said. "Minutes, notices, memoranda. Are you familiar with those?" "I receive far too many notices," he said. "As do we all," I replied. "But some notices matter. For example, this memorandum. I took it out slowly. I did not wave it. One does not wave paper at the Old Bailey. One presents it like a modest exhibit, and lets it do the work. "Do you recognize that?" I asked. He leaned forward, frowning. "It appears to be something from the managing agents," he said. "Read the relevant line," I said. The prosecutor rose. "My lord, is this document in evidence?" "It will be," I said, "as soon as the witness admits it exists." Mr. Justice Mortlake looked at the prosecutor as though he had interrupted lunch. "If the document is relevant, Mr. Rumpole may put it," the judge said. "Do not waste time." Mr. Peveril's face reddened slightly as he read. "Items were temporarily distributed to residents," he read, voice tight, "during the charity display and tenants' function." "And whose signature is at the bottom?" I asked. He stared at the page as though it had betrayed him. "It appears to be mine," he said, faintly. "Appears," I repeated. "So you did sign it?" He swallowed. "Yes," he said. "I signed many papers." "Splendid," I said. "Now, you say you never lent your silver, yet you signed a memorandum acknowledging that items were temporarily distributed. Do you deny that distribution took place?" He paused. A careful pause. The pause of a man trying to decide which lie will do the least damage. "No," he said. "There may have been temporary arrangements." "Temporary arrangements," I said, "including allocating the tea service to Mrs. Cragg." "I did not allocate anything," he snapped. "Then perhaps the paper did," I said. "Let us look at another record." I drew out the managing agent's list. I could sense the jury leaning, just slightly, as if they had remembered they were meant to listen. "Do you recognize this list?" I asked. He glanced at it, and his eyes narrowed. "I do not know," he said. "It could be anything." "It could be?" I agreed. "So let us help you. The heading says, 'Temporary Allocation,' and the tea service is listed, and beside it is the name Mrs. Mabel Cragg. That is your handwriting, is it not?" "It is typed," he said, desperate. "And the initials beside it?" I asked. He stared. "I cannot say," he said. "You cannot say," I repeated gently. "But you can say whether you knew the silver was at Mrs. Cragg's flat before the burglary." He hesitated, his lips pressed together. "I may have known," he said. "Thank you," I said. "And did you ever ask for it back?" "I intended to," he said. "Intended?" I repeated. "Did you?" "I was busy," he said, and then, as if hearing himself, grew more furious. "This is absurd! The point is, it was found in her cupboard after my flat was burgled." "And you reported it stolen?" I said. "Of course I did," he replied. "And at that time you forgot that you had distributed it for a tenant's function," I said. His face flushed a deeper red. "I did not forget," he said. "I simply did not connect it. There was a burglary. One does not think clearly." "One does not think clearly," I repeated, "especially when one has chaired meetings about standards." There was a small ripple from the jury. Not laughter, recognition. I leaned in, voice calm. "Mr. Peveril," I said, "you are embarrassed, are you not? You were eager to impress the residents. You lent your silver for a charity display. Then there was a burglary, and it would look foolish if the police discovered your prized service was not even in your flat." "That is not true," he said, too loudly. Mr. Justice Mortlake shifted, irritated. "Answer the question," the judge said. Mr. Peveril's voice softened, as though he could not bear to hear himself protest again. "I did not wish to look foolish," he admitted. "And so," I said, "when the police found the teapot in Mrs. Cragg's cupboard, you preferred to treat her as a criminal rather than admit you had left your property in a neighbour's care." "I did not treat her as anything," he said weakly. "The police did." "But you did not correct them," I said. "Did you?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. "No," he said. I let the silence sit for a moment. Silence, like paper, can be persuasive. "Thank you," I said. No further questions. As Mr. Peveril stepped down, he did not look at Mrs. Cragg. He did glance briefly at the blonde woman. She met his eyes for a fraction of a second, then she looked away. I sat, pulse steady. The case had turned. Not because Mr. Peveril was wicked, because he was vain, because he would rather let an old lady suffer than admit a small foolishness. And the law, in its colder moments, can be used to protect vanity, but not, I hoped, today. Chapter 8. The Insurance Lady. After Mr. Peveril stepped down, the air in court changed. It was not triumph. It was simply a loosening. Even juries, those sensible citizens dragged away from their ordinary lives, can smell embarrassment. And embarrassment, when it is neat and well-dressed, has a way of undermining certainty. The prosecution junior rose again, a little less brisk. "My lord," he said, "I propose to call one further witness." Mr. Justice Mortlake looked as though he had been promised a short list and was now being offered a sermon. "One witness," he said. "Then we shall see where we are." The blonde woman stood. So she was not merely company. She walked to the witness box with the careful poise of someone used to offices, not courts. She swore the oath and gave her name. "Miss Felicity Marlowe," she said. The prosecutor smiled, relieved to have something tidy. "Miss Marlowe," he began, "what is your relationship with the complainant, Mr. Peveril?" "I work with him," she said. "Professionally." "Professionally," I murmured. A word that can mean anything from accountant to companion. "In what capacity?" the prosecutor asked. "I am a claims adviser," she said. "I handle insurance matters." There it was, insurance. The quiet god of respectable London. The reason people keep receipts. The reason people lie. "And did you assist Mr. Peveril after the burglary?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," she replied, "I did." "Did you have any knowledge that the tea service was ever lent to residents?" he asked. "No," she said, and said it smoothly. "And did Mr. Peveril tell you he had lent it?" the prosecutor went on. "No," she repeated. The prosecutor turned to the jury with the satisfied air of a man who believes he has cleaned up the mess. "My lord, that is my evidence." Mr. Justice Mortlake nodded, as if he had been spared a longer inconvenience. "Mr. Rumpole," he said, "do you wish to cross-examine?" "I do, my lord," I said, and rose. Miss Marlowe looked at me with polite caution. She had the eyes of a woman who calculates risk for a living. "Miss Marlowe," I said, "you are an insurance adviser." "Yes," she replied. "And you assisted Mr. Peveril with his claim after the burglary." "I did," she said. "You told him what the insurers would want to know," I said. "I advised him," she replied. "Advised him," I repeated. "On what to say?" The prosecutor rose. "My lord, this is improper. Counsel is suggesting." Mr. Justice Mortlake held up a hand. "Mr. Rumpole is entitled to explore motive and credibility," he said. "Proceed, but do not make speeches." "As my lord pleases," I said. I turned back. "Miss Marlowe," I said, "do insurers pay without questions?" "Insurers always ask questions," she replied. "Of course," I said, "and they particularly ask whether an item was kept secure." "They do," she said. "And if an insured person admits he left valuable property in someone else's flat, that might affect the claim." "It could," she said. "It could," I repeated. "In fact, it might reduce it, or lead to delay, or refusal." "That depends," she said. "On the terms," I said. and on whether the insurers think the insured person has behaved sensibly. She hesitated. Yes, she said. Now, I said, did you advise Mr. Peveril to be careful about admitting his silver had been distributed to residents? The hesitation was longer this time. It was the pause of someone weighing truth against comfort. I advised him to be accurate, she said. Accurate, I said. And did accuracy include mentioning a tenant's function and a charity display? I was not aware of it, she said quickly. Not aware, I said, because he did not tell you. That is correct, she replied. And he did not tell you, I said, because it might make him look careless. The prosecutor rose again. My lord, Mr. Justice Mortlake, see he. Mr. Rumpole, he said, ask questions. Do not summarize. I am obliged, my lord, I said. I looked at Miss Marlowe. Miss Marlowe, I said, did Mr. Peveril ever express concern to you that it would be awkward if the police discovered the tea service had been lent out? She swallowed. He was upset, she said. He had been burgled. That was not my question, I said. Did he express that concern? He said, she began, then stopped, and then spoke more quietly. He said it would not look good. Thank you, I said. And when you attended court today, you sat beside him. Yes, she said. To support him, I said. I am here because I was asked, she replied. Asked by whom? I said. By his solicitors, she said. To ensure his claim is not harmed by what he says in evidence, I suggested. The prosecutor sprang up as though stung. My lord, Mr. Justice Mortlake glared. Mr. Rumpole, he said, you will not suggest impropriety without foundation. I bowed slightly. As my lord pleases, I said. Then let me put it another way. I turned to the witness. Miss Marlowe, I said, you have an interest in Mr. Peveril's account remaining consistent. I have an interest in truth, she replied stiffly. Truth, I said. Then perhaps you can help the court. You have heard Mr. Peveril admit he signed a memorandum about distributing items to residents. Yes, she said, reluctantly. And you have heard he did not mention that to you when you assisted with his claim. I have heard that, she said. Thank you, I said. So if Mr. Peveril omitted that fact in his dealings with insurers, he is capable of omitting it elsewhere. The jury watched her closely now. They had understood what I wanted them to understand. A respectable man can be selective with truth when money is involved. I sat down. No further questions. Miss Marlowe stepped out of the box, her posture still careful, but her certainty dented. She returned to her seat, and for the first time she did not look like a guardian. She looked like a participant. The prosecution junior gathered his papers, the neatness of his case now disturbed by a loose thread he had not anticipated. "My lord," he said, "that is the Crown's case." Mr. Justice Mortlake looked at me. "Mr. Rumpole," he said, "do you propose to call evidence?" "I do, my lord," I said. "But not a parade, merely what is necessary." "Good," he said. "We have had enough Teapot for one day." The jury smiled faintly. Even Mr. Justice Mortlake had a sense of proportion, though he kept it under strict control. I called the managing agent's representative. He came with the same nervous suit and the same desire not to be blamed. He confirmed the charity display. He confirmed the list of temporary allocations. He confirmed the minutes. He confirmed, most importantly, that Mrs. Cragg's name appeared as the temporary holder of the tea service. The prosecutor tried to suggest that temporary allocation did not mean permission to keep the items. "I do not suppose it does," I said when my turn came. "But it does mean she did not steal them. It means the silver entered her cupboard by arrangement." The managing agent nodded, grateful for any sentence that cleared him of responsibility. Then I faced the question every defending counsel faces. Should I call my client? Mrs. Cragg had sat through the evidence with the posture of someone trying to become invisible. She was not a liar. "That is precisely the problem. Honest people are easily shaken by court. They answer too much. They try to be helpful. They say things like, 'I suppose I should have,' and the Crown turns it into guilt." I rose. "My lord," I said, "I do not propose to call the defendant." The prosecution junior looked pleased, as though my restraint were his victory. Mr. Justice Mortlake nodded. "Very well," he said. "Then we shall have speeches tomorrow. I will adjourn." The usher called for silence. The jury stood. Mrs. Cragg stood with them, startled, as though she had expected the whole business to end in a moment of thunder. As we left court, she touched my sleeve. "Is that bad?" she whispered. "That I did not speak?" "It is sensible," I said. "Let the paper speak." It has a steadier voice. Outside in the corridor, Henry was waiting, pale with anxiety. "Sir," he murmured, "will the judge understand?" "The judge will understand time," I replied. "He will want to finish. That can be our ally. He does not like lingering doubts." "And the jury?" Henry asked. "The jury," I said, "have seen a respectable man caught by his own signature. They have heard an insurance lady admit that looking careless matters. Now they must be reminded of the law." Mrs. Cragg looked up at me, still frightened. "Will it be tomorrow?" she asked. "It will," I said, "and when it is done, we shall go back to ordinary life. You will go back to your kitchen. I will go back to she who must be obeyed. The world will continue to lend ugly things to one another." I did not add that the Old Bailey rarely punishes vanity. It merely exposes it, for a moment, under oath. And sometimes, for an old lady with a clean cupboard, that is enough. Chapter 9. The Golden Thread. The next morning I found myself at the Old Bailey earlier than was strictly decent. There are few pleasures in the world less appealing than a criminal court before one's first cup of tea, but duty, like marriage, has a way of insisting. Henry met me at the entrance, face already drawn. "Sir," he said, "Mrs. Cragg is here. She looks very worried." "Henry," I replied, "if she looked cheerful, I would suspect her." We found her in the corridor with Bonnie Bernard. She had dressed as she might for church, her best coat, her scarf neatly pinned, her hair done with care. The trouble with respectable clients is that they try to appear respectable, as if that should be enough. "Mr. Rumpole," she said, "I hardly slept." "Neither did I," I replied. "But mine was for professional reasons. Yours was for human ones." Bonnie cleared his throat. "The prosecution junior looked confident," he murmured. He was smiling. "A man who has never defended," I said. "Confidence comes easily when you do not have to look into the dock." We went in. Mr. Justice Mortlake arrived with his usual expression of restrained irritation. The jury were brought back, their faces showing the mild resentment of citizens forced to think about other people's lives. The prosecutor rose first. He had prepared a neat speech. He began with the burglary, moved smoothly to the discovery of the teapot, and then repeated the phrase he had used from the start. "Members of the jury," he said, "no one acquires such property innocently." I felt my wig itch again. He acknowledged, of course, the charity display and the tenant's function. He had to. Paper has a way of forcing acknowledgment, but he twisted it. "The tea service had been temporarily distributed," he said. "Temporarily? Mrs. Cragg had kept it for weeks. A responsible person would have returned it. A responsible person would have telephoned. A responsible person would have worried." Mrs. Cragg, he suggested, had known more than she admitted. At the very least, she had shut her eyes to the obvious. It was well put. It was plausible. It was also, in the way of many prosecution speeches, missing the soul of the law. When he sat down, Mr. Justice Mortlake looked at me as if I were the last item on a shopping list. "Mr. Rumpole," he said, "keep it brief." "My lord," I replied, "brevity has never been my strongest virtue, but I shall attempt it." I turned to the jury and took a moment, not for theatricality, but because a jury needs to feel that counsel is speaking to them, not at them. "Members of the jury," I said, "this case has been presented as straightforward. Silver stolen, silver found, old lady guilty. That is the Crown's hymn, and it has a pleasing simplicity. But the law does not convict on pleasing hymns. It convicts on proof." I held up the exhibit list, not waving it, simply showing the paper as one shows a map. "You have heard about possession," I continued. "Possession may be suspicious. It may raise questions. But possession is not proof of knowledge. That is why Parliament, in its occasional moments of sense, made handling an offence which requires you to be sure that the defendant knew or believed that the goods were stolen." I saw one juror nod slightly. "The word 'knew' matters. It is a small word, but it is the hinge of the whole case." "What do we know about Mrs. Cragg?" I asked. "We know she is a widowed pensioner. We know she lives quietly. We know she has been in the building for 20 years. We know that when the police came, she did not run. She did not hide the teapot. She did not say, 'You will never take my loot.' She opened her cupboard because she believed she had to, because she is the sort of person who still believes in authority." I paused. I let the picture settle. Old ladies do not fit easily into the Crown's image of criminal enterprise. "Now," I said, "how did the teapot come into her cupboard?" "The police, during a routine visit, assumed the answer. They did not examine the porter's log in detail. They did not pursue other lines. They saw silver in a clean kitchen and decided they had a fence." I glanced towards Inspector Sneed, seated behind the prosecution. He stared ahead, jaw set, listening to his own hymn being criticized. "But you heard other evidence," I said. "You heard from the managing agents. You saw a list of temporary allocations. That list shows that the tea service was distributed to residents for a charity display and a tenant's function. Mrs. Cragg's name is on it. That is not a criminal act. That is a committee decision." I looked at Mr. Peveril, sitting stiffly, and then back at the jury. "And you heard from the complainant himself," I said. "A man of standards, a man who chaired the residence committee, a man who signed a memorandum acknowledging that items were temporarily distributed. And yet, when he took the witness box, he first denied lending the silver at all. He denied it until he was confronted with his own signature. There was no need to say more. A jury can smell a reluctant admission." "Why did he deny it?" I asked. "Because he is wicked?" "I do not suggest that. Because he planned a plot against an old lady? I do not suggest that either. He denied it for a reason much smaller and much more common: embarrassment. He had lent his silver to impress the residents. He had taken pride in showing it. Then a burglary occurred, and suddenly he did not wish anyone to know that his precious service had not even been in his own flat. It would not look good. Not to the police, not to the insurers." I let the words "insurers" hang for a moment. Miss Marlowe's careful testimony had done its work. "You heard from Miss Marlowe," I said. "An insurance adviser. She told you that insurers ask about security. She admitted that it would not look good if the silver had been left elsewhere. She admitted that Mr. Peveril said it would not look good. That is why he did not tell her. That is why he did not correct the police when they found the teapot in Mrs. Cragg's cupboard." I walked a little closer to the jury box, not invading, simply narrowing the distance. "So what is the Crown really asking you to do?" I said. "They are asking you to convict a pensioner because she was too polite to return an ugly teapot without being asked, because she did not trouble a man who lives above her, because she assumed that when the time came, he would collect his own property. I held up my hand slightly. And if you think she was foolish, I said, that is not a crime. The law does not punish foolishness, it punishes guilt. The Crown must satisfy you so that you are sure that she knew or believed the teapot was stolen. Where is that proof? There is none. There is only suspicion, and suspicion is not enough. Mr. Justice Mortlake shifted, but he did not interrupt. Perhaps he sensed that this was, finally, brief enough to please him. In the end, I said, the law is a golden thread. It is not a noose. If we allow it to tighten around harmless people because it is convenient, then it will not stop there. Today it is Mrs. Cragg and a teapot. Tomorrow it will be someone else and some other object found in some other cupboard. I stepped back. Members of the jury, I said, I ask you to do the straightforward thing. Apply the law, require proof, and return the only verdict consistent with the evidence. Not guilty. I sat. Mr. Justice Mortlake looked at his notes, then at the jury. His summing up was, as one might expect, brisk. He outlined the elements of handling. He reminded the jury that possession alone was not enough. He reminded them that they must be sure about knowledge. He did not praise Mrs. Cragg. Judges like Mortlake do not praise. But he did, in his narrow way, acknowledge the paper. He sent the jury out. We waited. Waiting at the Old Bailey is a strange business. Time stretches. One hears the echo of doors, the shuffle of shoes, the murmur of distant cases. Mrs. Cragg sat with her hands clenched. Henry hovered, pale, as if he expected the jury to return with a warrant for his arrest as well. Bonnie Bernard tried to make small talk and failed. I do not blame him. Small talk is hard when a person's future is in a jury room. At last the jury returned. We stood. The clerk asked the question. The foreman, a man with a thoughtful face, cleared his throat. Not guilty, he said. For a moment Mrs. Cragg did not move. Then her shoulders dropped, as though some invisible weight had been lifted from them. Her mouth trembled, and she looked at me as if she could not believe the words had been spoken. Mr. Justice Mortlake nodded once. "You are free to go, Mrs. Cragg," he said. "That is the end of the matter. The end of the matter. That is what judges call it. As though a charge sheet and weeks of fear were a minor inconvenience." We left court into the corridor. Mrs. Cragg took my hand in both of hers. "Mr. Rumpole," she said, "thank you. I did not know one could fight." "One can always fight," I said. "One merely needs someone foolish enough to insist on it." Henry produced a handkerchief. He offered it to her with great seriousness. Mrs. Cragg dabbed at her eyes. Bonnie Bernard shook my hand again. "Well done," he said. "You did it." "I did what the law is meant to do," I replied, which is rare enough to feel like a miracle. As Mrs. Cragg walked away down the corridor, holding her handbag less tightly, I caught sight of Mr. Peveril. He stood with Miss Marlowe, face composed again, already reclaiming his standards. He met my eye for a moment. There was no hatred there, only relief that his embarrassment had not become a larger scandal. London is full of such men. They do not wish to harm anyone. They simply wish to avoid looking foolish. And the law, if one is not careful, becomes a convenient curtain behind which vanity can hide. Chapter 10. Château Thames Embankment. There are acquittals which feel like trumpets. There are others which feel like a door quietly closing. Mrs. Cragg's was the second kind. The law had done its duty, the jury had applied common sense, and Mr. Justice Mortlake had delivered his own version of mercy by calling it the end of the matter. But for Mrs. Cragg it was not the end of the matter. It never is. A frightened old lady does not forget the sound of her name read out in court, or the look of a policeman opening her cupboard as if searching for sin. When we emerged from the Old Bailey, London was doing what it always does after any verdict. It carried on. Buses rumbled, clerks hurried. A man sold newspapers with the cheerfulness of someone who has never been tried by a jury. Mrs. Cragg stood on the pavement and looked around as though she had been released into a different city. "Will it be on my record?" she asked. "Acquittal is not a conviction," I said. "It will not appear on your certificates. It will not follow you like a bad smell." She nodded, still uncertain. "They made me feel," she began, and stopped. "They made you feel guilty," I said. "That is part of the process. The system assumes guilt and then asks the defendant to disprove it. In theory, it is not meant to be that way. In practice, it often is." Henry hovered, having moved from anxiety to a sort of gentle triumph. He looked as if he wanted to announce the verdict to the whole of Fleet Street. Mrs. Cragg turned to me. "I cannot repay you," she said. "You can," I replied. "You can go home and do something the police will never understand. You can make tea, ordinary tea, in an ordinary pot." A small smile appeared, shaky but real. "I will," she said. She walked away, heading towards the bus stop with the slow care of someone returning to life. Henry watched her go. "I am glad, sir," he said. "I truly am. She is harmless." "That is why she needed defending," I replied. "The harmless are the easiest targets." Henry swallowed, then said what clerks always say at such moments. "Shall we return to chambers, sir?" "Of course," I said. "The law never rests. It merely pauses to sharpen its pencil." We returned to 3 Equity Court. Phillida was at her desk, calm as ever, as if acquittals happened every day and did not alter the balance of the universe. "Well?" she asked. "Not guilty," I said. She nodded once. "Good," she said. "And Mr. Peveril?" "Still respectable," I replied. "Still embarrassed. Still likely to attend committee meetings with renewed caution." Phillida did not smile, but her eyes softened by a fraction. "I will write to the police," she said, "about the manner of the search." "They will reply with a hymn," I said. "Routine, consent, procedure. It will not change them." "No," she said. "But it will be on the file." "That is Phillida. She believes in files the way I believe in claret." Claude Erskine-Brown arrived, as he always does, at precisely the moment one would rather not see him. He had the air of a man who has come to deliver a lecture. "Well?" he demanded. "Acquitted," I said. Claude blinked, as though the word were an unfamiliar legal concept. "Really?" he said. "Over a teapot?" "Even a teapot," I replied, "can be saved from injustice." Claude sniffed. "It is all very worthy," he said, "but you cannot build a career on defending old ladies." "Claude," I said, "I have built a career on defending the unpopular. Old ladies are merely a pleasing change." Claude muttered something about standards and vanished, leaving behind the faint sense that he wished he had prosecuted the case himself, if only to win it. By late afternoon, the need for Pomeroy's was as pressing as any legal duty. I walked there with the tired satisfaction of a man who has nudged the law into doing what it claims to do. Jack Pomeroy poured the claret without asking. "He knows my habits better than my own family." "Good day, Mr. Rumpole," he asked. "A fair day," I replied. "We saved an old lady from a teapot." "That's something," he said. "It is," I agreed. "It should not be, but it is." Henry appeared later, bringing with him a small envelope. "This came for you, sir," he said. "It was delivered by hand." I opened it. Inside was a note, written in neat, careful handwriting. "Mr. Rumpole, thank you. I have returned the silver to Mr. Peveril." He did not look pleased, but he took it. "I have made tea in my own pot. It is much nicer. Yours sincerely, Mabel Cragg." Henry watched my face, eager for meaning. "She returned it," he said. She still thinks of doing the proper thing. She will always do the proper thing, I replied. That is why the police suspected her. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. There are letters one keeps, not for sentiment, but as evidence that the work still matters. I took a sip of claret and murmured, quietly, more to myself than to Henry. The world is too much with us, I said. Late and soon. Henry looked puzzled, as he often does when poetry enters a room. Sir, he said. It is Wordsworth, I explained. He meant that we lose ourselves in getting and spending. I would add that we also lose ourselves in paperwork, pride, and insurance forms. Henry nodded as though he understood, which was kind of him. I finished my claret and made my way back to Froxbury Mansions, where she who must be obeyed was waiting. Hilda was in the sitting-room, reading. She looked up as I entered, and I could see she had already decided what the verdict ought to have been. "Well?" she asked. "Acquitted," I said. Hilda sniffed. "Of course," she said. "Old ladies always get off. Juries feel sorry for them." "They did not feel sorry," I replied. "They applied the law." Hilda gave me the look she reserves for my most persistent delusions. "And what will happen now?" she asked. "Will you stop taking these silly cases?" "No," I said. "I will take the next one. And the next. That is my trade." Hilda sighed, not cruelly, but with the weary affection of someone who has married stubbornness and cannot unmarry it. "You will be the death of me," she said. "My dear," I replied, "I have been accused of worse than that, and unlike a silver teapot, I can at least speak in my own defense." Hilda returned to her magazine as if closing an argument. I hung up my gown, poured myself a modest glass of something not quite Château Thames Embankment, and sat down. Outside, London continued to rain faintly. Inside, Froxbury Mansions continued to disapprove, and somewhere in a small flat downstairs an old lady was making tea in an ordinary pot, safe again from the law's heavy hand and from the foolish vanity that had tried to turn her cupboard into a criminal exhibit. That, in my experience, is as close to justice as we usually get. Rumpole and the silver teapot. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the case of Mrs. Mabel Cragg and the lamentable object which nearly put her behind bars. I trust it has reminded you of two truths which the criminal courts prefer to forget. First, that a respectable signature can be a far more dangerous instrument than a jemmy. Second, that the law, when it is at its best, is not a machine for grinding down the harmless, but a rather temperamental safeguard which must be kept honest by stubborn old hacks and sensible juries. If you have enjoyed this visit to the Old Bailey, I shall not demand applause. I shall merely suggest, with the modesty of counsel addressing the jury, that you might like the video and subscribe, but only if you like what I am doing here. And do tell us where you are and what time it is in the comments. It is always a comfort to know that while London frets over teapots and insurance forms, the rest of the world is carrying on with its own small absurdities. Now, as for me, I am off to Pomeroy's for a final glass of something that has never been anywhere near a chateau, and perhaps a cigar to restore the balance of my soul. Tomorrow there will be another brief, another worried client, another policeman with a hymn about routine inquiries. That is the rhythm of our trade. Until then, switch off the lights, draw the curtains against the rain, pour yourself a modest glass of Château Thames Embankment, and remember, in the Old Bailey, it is often the quietest people who most need a voice. Good night.